Well, okay, so this is our week 5 update for school, my education that I'm doing. Lots more learning, a lot more things that we have been talking about this week. So, to begin with, in my Intro to Religious Studies class, we've been spending a lot of time talking about understanding rituals. What are the things that, how does rituals and religion and things work together to help define or understand our experience with religion? Has been kind of interesting to look at. There's different types of rituals for different types of religions, and how does that help them shape their experience from a religious standpoint? It was kind of a fun thing to do. In the Christianity class, this one's kind of getting into a fun time of Christianity, more of a time that people are familiar with because we're getting into the ideas around the Great Reformation. So, if you're not familiar with the Great Reformation, so as Christianity blossomed, like we've talked about in the past weeks' videos, there was kind of a main line of Christianity that really stood out that most people think about, which is Catholicism. So that's what went up and spread through Europe. And eventually, as it became very established, it became very ingrained into everything. There was no separation of church and state in some cases. There was a lot of debates and discussion between what was more important, church or state. Who was over who? Was the church over the state, or was the state over the church? How does that dynamic work? I think last week we talked about that. As they grew, it's Catholicism changed over time. Different ideas, different standards came around, different beliefs and things became normal. And as literacy grew, as people learned to read, as the movable type printing press started to show up as well, during this time, the more people were reading the Bible themselves rather than relying on the priests to tell them what the Bible said. And as this happened, people started to realize, I interpret the Bible different than my priest does, or there's things in the Bible the priest isn't telling us that we should do, or that, there's contradictions between what the priest is saying and what the Bible is saying. And this was a challenge that happened. And so a lot of people started to challenge the authority of the church. This is the beginning of the Reformation. So the most common name we hear of with the Reformation is Martin Luther. He went to his local church and he wrote up a document of 95 questions that he's like, this is what the Bible says, but we're not doing it. Why? What's the deal? And he nailed it to the door of his local church, which was not an uncommon thing. It's not like he was making some statement with putting it there. The door was a common place for kind of a bulletin board of things, and his was one thing he put up there. Anyways, that's kind of probably the most common story of the Reformation that's there. Well, apparently, we only hear the good side of Martin Luther. Apparently, he was he had a personality. He had a lot of issues that he was dealing with, and we probably wouldn't, in today's world where we only look at the bad side of people, we don't realize that people can be good and bad. I think we could put him in that same category as a lot of people look at Christopher Columbus or George Washington or others that did great things, but weren't all perfect. That Martin Luther would be in that same category, basically. So the Reformations happened, and what was interesting, I never thought about this with the Reformations. I always thought of like the Catholic Church is kind of doing their thing, and then the Reformations peel off from them. This is where the Anglican Church comes from, the Church of England. This is where you get your Lutheranism, your Anabaptists, the Baptist churches, the Protestants, the Pentecostal churches, Episcopal churches. All those start to kind of peel off from there a little bit during this time, and that's known as the Reformation, basically. Well, as things happened, what I never realized is at that time, as the reformers were pushing back against the church, basically, the Catholic Church decided to do their own reformation. They realized, hey, there's some arguments, there's some issues being brought up here that are valid. Let's reevaluate what we're doing. And so they did. And so there was the questions that the great reformers were asking actually helped to improve the church a little bit more. Sometimes it doubled down on their own doctrine, sometimes it didn't. But there was a bit of a reformation, even inside the Catholic Church, that happened at the same time, which was I'd never really thought about. That was kind of an interesting thing that we had discovered. Some just different ideas, different things that were going on. How do we interpret what is in the Bible? What is what are the sacraments we need? Because the church, the predominant church, was their idea was that what the Bible says and what our traditions say are equal. So you can learn from both. Whereas Martin Luther was like, no, the Bible is absolute authority and should supersede any traditions that we have created. And so that was part of that discussion and debate back and forth that they had back then. My intro to Christianity, or not intro to Christianity, excuse me, my Chinese history class has been an interesting one this week. So we spent a lot of time understanding the beginning of the first empire, the first emperor of China. Really, I mean, we hear about this stuff all the time. The empire, the emperors of China, the great empire of China, those kinds of things. But to put it in a more of a historical context was really fun. So when you look at Chinese history, we're only looking about 4,000 years into the past. So about 2000 BC. Around that time is when they start to see the beginning of the first dynasty. So Chinese history, as when the people came together as a more of a great whole nation, was the let's see, what dynasty was that one? That was the Xia dynasty, I think is what we called it, and it was about 2,000 years ago, basically. As that dynasty went on, it eventually turned into the Shang dynasty, which is the Xia dynasty is considered kind of the pre-dynastic dynasty. So dynasty 0. The Shang dynasty is known as the first dynasty of China. And then the Zhou dynasty is the next one after that. The Zhou dynasty is an important one to understand in Chinese history. Now, when I say Zhou dynasty, it's spelled Z-H-O-U is how you spell Zhou. That's the dynasty that's important to talk about. It ran from about 1045 BC to about 256 BC. So if you want to equate that to the time period of like Christianity, you're looking at 1045 is after Solomon's day, basically, but then 256 BC would be the intermediary period in between the time of the Old Testament and the New Testament. So more closer to the time of the Maccabean revolt, that era, basically. So kind of some interesting connections, or just those are things happening in different parts of the world in the history, basically. The Zhou dynasty does pretty good as a big dynasty, but then the leaders kind of get lazy in being leaders, and the country kind of falls apart. And it divides itself up into lots of different warring factions. So we get more of a kind of a warlord tribalism type idea going on. And this is known as the 100 Flowers period, because there's lots of these little small dynasties, small little kingdoms coming up, basically. They start to fight amongst each other, take each other over, get resources from each other, all kinds of infighting things happen. This is also the time of lots of development in China, a lot of military strategies, military technology start to build. The crossbow is actually invented at that time. Different. So the crossbow was something we see in England and Europe and in China. They were invented separately. They didn't there's no evidence that one of them was invented in one place and then the technology got moved to the other one, or vice versa. They were invented, but at different times, basically. So anyways, in this time, this is when the Art of War, Sun Tzu's Art of War, was written. This is also when Confucianism came out, Taoism came out as well. So if you ever read the I Ching, Tao Te Ching, those kinds of ideas, all that came around in this 100 Flowers period. So a lot of innovation that we can think of today came from this period. Well, during this 100 Flowers period, what happened basically was one of the dynasties, the Qing dynasty, who's farther to the west, decided it got big and powerful and was doing really well, and it ended up basically militarily taking over all the other kingdoms and eventually formed the first empire of China. So it was done by force, basically. They would come in and go, hey, you either surrender to us or we're just going to take you over. And so I'm sure some fought back and then lost, and others said, yeah, we're out. We'll just surrender and be a part of the dynasty, and take it over. So, anyways, this is when the first emperor of China is known. So this is again around 256-ish BC, 221 BC kind of time frames, that the first empire was created basically in China. So the first emperor ruled in China about this time. The and this is, I mean, this is kind of a good thing to have, because as the first empire in China began, there was, because if you think about it, they went from lots of different types of coins, different ways of measuring values of things and weights and measures and stuff. There wasn't a standard in China yet. So what he did was he unified the language, he unified the weights and measures, he unified the coinage, he pulled a lot of things together that just simplified life in China. So it made it a really better existence, better opportunities for people. So it wasn't a bunch of smaller groups trying to work together. It was one group, one land, basically, was this concept and idea that they brought together for China. With this as well, like I said, a lot of changes, things happen. But what's interesting is this dynasty, not dynasty, excuse me, this empire, okay, as being ruled as an emperor of China, this concept lasted until about 1911. So it lasted nearly 2,000 years by itself, where China was ruled by an emperor and was unified. Then it changed, the name changed into the Republic of China, and then about, I think 1947, it was the People's Republic of China is what it turned into. Still the same idea of a unified country, one government, one person at the head of everything else. But that's after 1911 is when it was more modernized and more communistic in our way of thinking today, basically. But something that's interesting, so two more points that are really interesting with this that we have some basis on. So the Great Wall of China. Now the Great Wall of China, there was small sections of it that different kingdoms had built over time in their kingdoms along that border. But what happened with this first emperor was he said, we need to just build the Great Wall. So he's the one that commissioned the Great Wall of China. He put it in place. So this is 2,000 years ago. They put this in place around, again, 220-ish BC time frame, just to give you an idea. And they put the whole Wall of China in. So they took all these, they put, instead of having a dashed line across China, they made one solid line across China. They unified everything together and pulled it as one big wall. Also during this time, this emperor wanted to create kind of a mini scale model version of his empire that he could put in his tomb. So he had people, they built into this area, that they got this large area, and they built a tomb for the emperor that had a small scale version of his empire in it, basically. It took 36 years to build and about 750,000 people to build it, basically, to put it all in, to carve it all out, to get it all put into place. He also brought artisans in to like paint pictures and to do things. So they depicted some of the constellations they were seeing back then. They depicted, what was the geographical, like a big map of the empire. All these things were artisans were brought in to put all this together. He made a copy of his army. That's the terracotta army we hear about in China, was his. So all of that goes, that whole thing was basically a giant mausoleum or tomb for the first emperor of China. He put all that together. He didn't want anybody to know it was there because he didn't want the treasures looted and raided and his tomb destroyed. So he actually, when he died and they put him in there, they sealed the artisans in. So they all died inside the tomb, basically. They got sealed in so that nobody would know where this tomb was or what was going on. And a garden was put over the top of it on the surface. They had a garden put in. And in 1974, a farmer who owned some of that land in that garden was drilling a hole for a well, and he hit the Terracotta Army. And that's when they found it. So it sat untouched till 1974. So 2,000 years, that tomb of the emperor had not been touched. It remained sealed. So that's why we have it today, and we can see it. And they haven't fully excavated the whole thing, from what I understand. They're still working on that. So that's kind of cool. It all came from the first emperor of China. Okay, back around 220-ish, 230, 240-ish BC time frame. So I mean, when you think of like the age of like Judaism, which goes way back, beyond that, China as a recognized nation, even as the empire of China, is only around 2,000 years old. It's not like as old as we think. It's more recent in history than even like Babylon or the Akkadian empires or the Sumerians and Judaism and some of those groups that go way, way back. But really just fun to learn, fun things to study and learn and understand. Now, I'm trying to think. That was kind of the main thing we did. In fact, one of the things we had to do for the Chinese class is watch a movie. So, sorry, my hat was bugging me in the video. Like it was a little off. There is a story of during that 100 Flowers time before the Qing Empire took over, basically before King Zheng took over everything. There's a story of an assassin that he was hired by some of the other kings, the other magistrates, to say, let's go assassinate him so he can't dominate all of us. We can try to still come together and work together. And it failed. It was a miserable failure of an experience. But they made a movie about it. And of course, just like in true movie fashion, the movie's more sensational than the book. And the movie isn't completely accurate. It's based on the other story, but they took a lot of license with it. So there's a movie out there called The Hero. It stars Jet Li. You can go rent it on Amazon for like $3.50. PG-13. It was an interesting show to watch. We had to watch that show actually for the class. And it's a depiction of this idea of the assassin going to take out the king of Qing, basically. And it kind of talks about these ideas, these concepts of these different nations and coming together and fighting and warring among themselves and all these things that were happening. The real story is a lot less glamorous. I mean, so basically the real story, as we read, was one of the other kings met this guy who had learned swordsmanship, who had been doing some martial arts and some other things, and said, hey, I need you to be an assassin for me. He finally said, okay, fine, what do you want me to do? And he says, I need you to go assassinate the king of Qing, basically, and get rid of him. So they put this plot together. He actually brings a friend, this guy he knows that's like, just, you cross, there's this guy that he knows that if you make him mad, he has no qualms taking your life. He's just ruthless. So the goal was the two of them would go to the king. They would bring the head of a traitor with them to as a reward. Say, hey, king, you put a reward out for this guy's head. We're bringing you the head. So we want our reward. Plus, we have this map of this enemy territories that you haven't taken over yet that we want to give you that can help you in your conquests. And as they're going to give him the map, the ruthless guy would basically stab the king with a poisoned dagger and kill him. Well, they get in front of the king. The ruthless guy basically freezes up. He's never met the emperor or this guy before, and he's kind of known. Sometimes the emperors would be known as like the son of God, like these are earthly representations of deity, kind of an idea. And so they go to meet him, and he just kind of freezes up, so he can't do it. So the original guy that concocted the plan, he takes the map up, but he forgets the dagger's in the map. So as he unrolls the map, the dagger falls out. And the king's like, "What is that?" Oh yeah. So he grabs the dagger and tries to kill the king. The king escapes him. They're chasing each other around. Nobody else has weapons in the palace area. The king's assistants, none of them have weapons on them, so that none of them could betray the king. And so they can't help the king. But the guy goes to throw the dagger at the king. He misses. The king eventually gets his sword out and wounds the guy. And then all the other assistants to the king come in, and they basically just beat the heck out of the guy and kill him. And so then the other guy is trampled. The guy that froze, he gets trampled in the whole process, and he gets killed too. And then the king goes out and does his revenge against the other kings that were trying to plot his assassination, and it doesn't end well for them. And the King of Qing ends up taking over everything anyways. So that's a bit more of the real story. But if you want to watch the I wouldn't say a Hollywood rendition, because it wasn't made in Hollywood. So the movie The Hero is a Chinese movie with English subtitles. So it is different to watch. If you're not used to watching Chinese movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or those things, it's going to be a different experience for you. If you've seen movies like that, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, then this is not going to be that bad. In fact, there's a guy in Star Wars in this movie that was really cool to see him too. So it was fun. If you want to go watch more of that, it was a fun thing to see. They do play a game in there called Go. It looks like Othello. You put these tiles on, black and white tiles on a board, and have their strategy around it. I've never played it, but I hear it's a fun game to play, so we'll see. Maybe I'll pick it up one day and try it. But that's kind of the nutshell of what I've spent this whole week learning, was all this Chinese history, which has been really fun to do. Understanding Christianity as we're getting into the Reformation period, as things moved. Like, I didn't even realize there was actually a Christian group in Congo. The Congolese actually adopted Christianity and did well, and they were highly influenced from the Portuguese. But then later they lost it, and people decided, oh, we don't think you really were Christian, so we're going to kind of do away with you, which is dumb, but that's sometimes how it happens. And even got into the idea of Christianity moving to Latin America, so Central America and Southern America, and even a little bit of North America. We haven't got into a lot, but I think that's coming up. But as Christianity spread, and through India as well, Christianity was pretty widely used in India for a long time. The legend is that Thomas, the apostle, was the first missionary in India. He went from the Middle East, doubting Thomas. He went from the Middle East period to more Eastern and over to India, and then did his missionary works there. I don't think it can be definitively proven it was Thomas the Doubter that actually went to India as the apostle to start him, but I think people were there learning. There were some missionaries that went over there and learned, but then they kind of like backdated and back connected their story to make it sound more cool. But Christianity has been in India since near the 1st century, so like 1,000 years practically that Christianity has been in India. One thing that was interesting that we learned in that one as well, just this just kind of came to me, was the idea of the Mother Mary. So in Orthodox Christianity, even in which is your Catholicism, which is your Eastern Orthodox, the Coptic Christianity in North Africa, Ethiopic churches, your Greek Orthodox, all these groups, they developed a concept over time of the veneration of saints. So you could pray to a saint, and that saint would then deliver the message to Christ and then work with them, and that would help out. So eventually Christ became seen as a deity that was set apart, that was distant. Oh, he's so magical, he's so amazing and majestic, we can't deal with him directly, so we go through someone else to get to him. And the most common and popular one was his mother, Mary. And so people would pray to Mary, and they would receive blessings from Mary. She could directly heal people and to do things. And it kind of became seen as Mary could actually say, you're saved. I don't have to talk to my son for everybody, but I can do some of the saving myself, because Mary was seen as immaculate. She was seen as perfect. which is why she could give birth to the Son of God, or God, basically, actually, from your perspective of the Trinitarian ideas. So she was adopted through a lot of different parts of Christianity, very heavily influenced Latin America, South American Christianity, Indian Christianity. India had goddesses. So it was interesting when Christianity was really being strongly introduced into India. They realized, that worshiping Christ, the Son of God, by having him as the focal point of the religion, didn't mesh well with Indian philosophy and culture. But Indian philosophy and culture also had this idea of intercessory gods. So you could pray to a goddess who could then take the message to her husband, who is the main god, and help you. So that was the same idea that we have developing with the saints, praying to a saint who could then relay the message to Christ. And so the idea of Mary as a goddess of India started to become a thing. There was poetry written about it, statues designed up, everything. So this idea of worshiping Mary as a way to get to Christ became a thing. And so that actually made it easier for Orthodox Christianity to be adopted in India, because they had a similar concept. They had a framework in their mind already of goddesses that you can pray to get help. And so Mary became one of them. And that became the connection between Hinduism and Christianity, that made it easier for Christianity to be adopted in India. So just some fun little facts and tidbits and things. If you have any questions for me about anything we've studied, let me know in the comments. If you've played the game Go, let me know what you think about it. I haven't played that one yet, that ancient Chinese game. So that game is like over 2,000 years old. So maybe I'll get it one day and try it out. So thanks for watching. Hope you're enjoying these updates from my classes. I'm really looking forward to next semester. So this is week 5. There's 14 weeks, so we're about almost halfway done with this semester for summer, and then in September, end of August, early September, we start fall semester. And I've got some really cool classes I'm gonna do for that one. So stay tuned for those, and we'll share more next week.